extract some other functions out of this function, right? It's getting a little long, and it seems like it does more than one thing. We like our functions to have a single responsibility. Look at this monster. That's way too long. It's doing a lot more than just handling submit. It's building spans, it's building an item, it's doing way too much work. I say we write some functions. Who did it? Who wrote more functions? All right, what functions did you write? Curtis? Okay, cool. What'd you do?
Build less element, build font elements, build span element. I took the font because
I know, that's fine. We don't have to.
Fade out effect.
Oh, fade out. Well, fancy pants. Scary Terry, what'd you do?
I got create li.
It is how I remember. Sorry.
But create li, create span, and then determine level was for like specifically for
I'm sorry. I was thinking about the nickname. I wasn't listening. What'd you say?
I said create li, create span, and then which is like specific.
Okay, for your behavior, yeah. Sorry about that. All right. Lego Maniac, what'd you do?
I just had 3 different append functions. So one for my head, for my title, then one for my description, and then one for my list.
All right, so if there's a theme here, like all the different things that we build, we can make new functions for that, right? How about we make a thing that spits out spans? We can name it Span Spitter. We're not going to, but we could. It's just nice to, it's just comforting to know that we can name it something like that if we wanted to. What are we doing here? So each of these spans, what do they represent? They represent a different property of the spell, right? So I'm going to name mine renderProperty. Maybe, I mean, they're spans now. Maybe someday there'll be something other than spans. Doesn't matter. I just like that name better. renderProperty equals function. And it's going to basically do something like this. Now, I would really like, you look at these lines for name span and level span, they're awfully similar. So I'd like to reuse the same function for both. Why not? So what would I need to do in order to do that? I need to identify which parts would change between namespan and the other one, level. And those things should probably get passed in as arguments, right? Whatever the differences are should get passed in as arguments. So what's different? First of all, namespan. Let's just call it, I'm going to call it EL for element. Oh, here's a trick. I didn't tell the morning class this yet because there wasn't an occasion to use it yet. Check this out. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. Highlight the rest of these. I've got 4 cursors. What? Yeah, cursor inception. That's right. We got to go deeper. It's pretty great stuff. So I'm going to name it EL. Don't get too carried away with the super short variable names. Use descriptive variable names, but there are a few things that are really common, like EL for element, EV for event, E for error, that kind of stuff, that are pretty universal. If you need some clarity about which element it is, then probably don't do that. But in something like this is just a thing that builds an element and returns it. So calling it EL is probably fine for inside this thing. Now notice I said it builds an element and returns it. It doesn't return it yet, does it? So let's not forget to return something at the end here. So we build the span and then we return it. So which lines would need to change between spell name and level? Which lines in that function would need to be different? 4 through 7. 4 through 7? What's wrong with 4?
Span would need to be level.
It's still a span.
Oh, sorry.
There's still spans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
So 5 through 7.
5, 6, and 7 all seem to be different, right? So the class is, what is that? That's really the name of the property, right? And what we said is the text content is really the value of the property, right? And this is the value again, right? Agreed? So how about I have properties named name and value? And my class list, I add whatever the name is. The text content, I set to whatever the value is. And the title, I set to whatever the value is.
Do you need to put in the value? Can you just say name dot value?
Well, so the name will just be like the string spell name or the string level. See what I'm getting at? So let's just test this function independently without tying it to anything else. Let's just test this in the console. Wouldn't even have to have anything to do with spells. Let's just call render property and see if I get what I expected. Render property. Somebody was eating Cheerios as I was discussing this, so sitting right there. What did you have for lunch, Jacob? That's what everyone had for. Oh, I like sandwich better. Okay, so twamages. All right, very good. Span class equals lunch. Title equals twamages. Text content twamages. It seems to work. We got our span spitter. Now, how do we actually use it? Seems like all this could go down to just render property. Name span, and then, or not name span, sorry, spell name, right? That's what my CSS is expecting. And the variable spell name. So this, the first thing, is what's going to get assigned to the class. So the class, my CSS is looking for spell name, right? Yeah, so the string spell name followed by the actual variable spell name. And all of this could get replaced by the same thing. Render property, just level, and the variable level. And hopefully it all works exactly as it did before. Cool. Hover over it. That part still works. Nifty. We did it. Go us. We have at least one more function. So we didn't actually change any behavior, did we? All we did was change code. What's that called when you change the structure of your code without changing its behavior? Refactoring, exactly. Refactoring is changing the structure of your code without changing its behavior. Extract, render property function. Questions? Yeah.
Can you, like, I've seen there are like options in IDEs where you can press refactor. Does it just do literally that? It takes stuff and
IDEs that have automatic refactoring. Honestly, since I don't use any of those languages, I'm not entirely sure what they do. They might probably look for certain patterns that are anti-patterns, as they say, and refactoring. But if, for example, you're using, like, there are lots of design patterns that have names, like factory, or now off the top of my head on the spot, I'm not thinking of many of them. But like, if you have an if, else, like, that's generally considered not the best way to write that, almost certainly. It would probably like write it a different way that's preferred. I don't know. Yeah, I don't use any of those IDEs. That's usually a Java thing. Yeah.
Okay, so is there any preference on whether or not you use like const, like I don't know what you had, but I like const spell equals function versus function name with the argument list?
Just for the sake of variable scope, I am in the habit of pretty much doing it this way all the time, just because it leads to fewer surprises, I think. The other main reason we're going to learn about in about an hour which is something a little different. But that makes me use this syntax most of the time because of the way I actually organize my code.
Essentially, like there is a reason.
There is a reason.
For either one over the other.
There is a reason. Like the functional difference right now, the only difference we've really learned is if you use a function declaration, that is, you don't assign it to a variable, then you have hoisting, which means you could put the function at the bottom and you can still call it up here. So you can call it before it's actually defined, which is actually kind of handy sometimes. But there are some other differences with the way we're going to do it an hour or so from now. Cool? All right.